Welcome back to today's video. Today is Saturday, October 5th, 2024, and today we are going to be talking about the state of the 2024 presidential race according to the polls 1 month out from the presidential election. I most recently made an election prediction on October 1st, so I wasn't able to hold off until 1 month out from the election. I wish that I was able to do so. So today I decided to take a look at what the polls were telling us, really do a snapshot in time moment where it just understands, the averages of the polls in the battleground states, some of the more non-battleground states, but still a bit more competitive, to just generally gauge where we're at and what the current state of the race actually is according to practically the only data points that we have right before an election is actually conducted and concluded in just over a month. Now, I've been really excited to see what the data actually presents itself. I have yet to take a look at every single battleground state and map it out myself, so we're going to be doing this in real time across the 229 electoral votes that have yet to be characterized by this map here. So I've done, my due diligence in characterizing some states that are going to be a bit more competitive, that are going to be already likely, that don't have many substantive polls out of them. Alaska is one of those. South Carolina is one of those. Maine at large is one of those. Alaska does have an interesting poll that does show the most accurate pollster from the 2022 cycle and all the special elections showing Donald Trump in single digits in the state of Alaska, a reduction from support from the 2016 and 2020 election. And that's to be expected. Alaska has actually shifted a little bit more towards the left over recent years. But beyond that point, too, I think what's interesting is that poll actually shows Donald Trump under 5 points. So Alaska, according to really just that poll, would show Donald Trump in a position where he's, on average, down compared to 2020 by a pretty substantive amount. Now, because there weren't many other major pollsters or any other A or strong quality pollsters, A refers to the rating that they have, I decided to just forego that. So we're moving on to the 229 electoral votes where we actually do have substantive polling that will help, again, gauge where we are at right now. So Democrats start off with 183 electoral votes from their safe states and likely states. Republicans are at 126, and so this really will be filling out the majority of competitive states and just a really, really good amount of our electoral map in totality. So we'll start off by taking a look at what the national numbers actually tell us, and then we'll go down state by state, starting from the West Coast, moving over to the East Coast. The state right now where Kamala Harris is up 2.5% nationally, a bit of a reduction from when she was up 3 points nationally at different periods of time. She was up 3.3, then 2.9, 2.7, 2.9, 2.8. Now she's up only 2.5%. Still maintaining that lead right at different periods of time. It was a much more competitive race than it is today, but it is still very competitive, and many of the battleground states are just as close, if not closer, than our national head-to-head right now. So continuing down this, let's go ahead and start off with the state of Nevada, which is the first state that's going to be characterized for red or blue. So Nevada right now has Kamala Harris up 0.9%. This is a state that has actually fluctuated quite a bit. Trump has been in the lead at different points, maintained that lead over Joe Biden actually for months on end. So now that Kamala Harris leads by 0.9%, this is actually quite meaningful for the Kamala Harris campaign. Absolutely an improvement off of where Biden was in a very dramatic way. Arizona right now has Donald Trump up by 1.4%. Another state, too, that has absolutely fluctuated back and forth. Kamala Harris had an advantage throughout almost the entire month of August. Donald Trump took it back in September. It flipped back and forth at the end of September. Now that we're into October, Donald Trump has expanded his lead to 1.4%. That's where we are in that battleground state. Moving over to the state of New Mexico. This is a state Kamala Harris maintains an 8.2% advantage. I want to get this out in one swing. Colorado, we don't have many other polls here, but double-digit leads. Harris plus 15, Harris plus 10, Harris plus 11. Talking about an average here of Harris being up double digits, but not to be safe. New Mexico, slight reduction from 2020. Colorado, roughly on par with that of 2020. Slight reduction as well, too, just on the overall stretch. Regardless, though, Kamala Harris at 204 electoral votes, characterizing in all of those states. The next big one is the state of Texas, which has had some pretty strong polling for the Democratic nominee for Senate there, but Donald Trump actually maintains an advantage in the state of 6.4%. This is actually better than where Donald Trump was in 2020 by actual vote count. Donald Trump won Texas by 5.6%. In a scenario in which he wins by 6.4%, this does show that there is a bit of a reduction in support from the 2020 election. I mean, Donald Trump, reduction in support for Democrats, reduction in support for Kamala Harris compared to Joe Biden. Obviously, Kamala Harris doing a lot better in comparison to Joe Biden's numbers in the state, but still at large, Donald Trump maintains an advantage that makes this state a likely Republican state. 157 remaining electoral votes, Donald Trump really making up that gap with a very, very populous state. The next area we're going to look at isn't even a state. It's Nebraska's second congressional district, one of the two states of the entire nation that votes down by congressional district. What we have found is that in this Nebraska's second, the numbers have been very strong for Kamala Harris. You can see CNN SSRS, Harris plus 11. You can see New York Times Siena College, Harris plus 9. Very strong numbers in that second district. As you continue down, you can see it. Harris plus 5. Right, Nebraska second, Harris plus 8, Harris plus 5. All around an average here of a lead larger than that of Joe Biden in 2020, and it's a likely Democratic district. One more electoral vote for Kamala Harris. Moving over to the state of Iowa, we can go back and take a look at what the numbers show in that state, Iowa. And what we find here is that there haven't been many strong polls out of the state, but the average lead for Donald Trump hovers around 5.5%. And so what that means is that Donald Trump wins the state narrowly enough to move past into that likely column, bringing him to 183. Minnesota, on the flip side, we are seeing numbers here that show Kamala Harris with a 5.7% advantage, equally, just enough to get it over that likely hurdle in favor of the Democratic nominee for president. So 140 remaining toss-up electoral votes, Kamala Harris at 215, Donald Trump at 183. We're still filling out the remainder of the seats here, or remaining number of electoral votes, but it's getting, again, tighter and a lot closer than it was at initial glance when we started off here. Moving over to the next state that we should characterize, the state of Wisconsin. Kamala Harris holds a 1.6% advantage, so this is a lean Democratic state. Again, an improvement off of some periods of time during the campaign, but a reduction from where she was earlier on in August. That seems to have been a really strong point after the DNC, after the VP announcement. She was up 4 points in Wisconsin. Today, she's up 2 points, so absolutely a reduction, but still something to note that she is still maintaining that advantage. In Michigan, again, a bit smaller than where it was before, around August, which was even stronger for Kamala Harris. Today, it's a 1.5% advantage. Overall, though, is a lean Democratic state. So that brings Kamala Harris to 240 electoral votes. Let's continue as we move down this pathway. I would say Ohio is next, or Florida, honestly, should even be the next state that we characterize. So let's move over to the state of Florida, which we didn't expect to be a battleground until we started to see some of these numbers that have really gone to show that Florida, in fact, is narrowing up quite a bit. Donald Trump at 4 points in the lead here, a bit of a reduction, too, from where it was before. A bit surprising, some of these states have opposite trend lines, but Florida still largely has been this lean Republican state based on the polls, and it is staying exactly in that column. So that's 30 electoral votes. Donald Trump already at 213. I believe that Ohio, then Georgia should be moved on to next. So Ohio is going to be a pretty interesting one. Joe Biden was doing really poorly against Donald Trump in this state. Kamala Harris is doing not so well either. A slight reduction in support from 2020. Honestly, on par with what we've been seeing in some of these other battleground states where the numbers don't look as strong for Kamala Harris as they did for Biden back in 2020. But even then, though, she still is leading in some of the states by larger margins than Biden did in 2020. So it's really just a game on how some of these states are going to vote and what they're feeling right now. So that's Georgia. That is not the state that we just characterized. We'll move over to Georgia in just a moment. Ohio is meant to be the one that we should have characterized first. Georgia has Trump up by 1.3%. Again, a state that has fluctuated. Donald Trump started off in that lead, lost the lead, took it back, started to narrow, and now he's back to being in the head by 1.3%. That is a lean characterization for Donald Trump. Now he surpasses Kamala Harris on this ballot here. So the next state to characterize is the state of North Carolina. This is a very big one that both parties are really, really investing in. Donald Trump maintains an advantage just under a percentage point in this state. Donald Trump jumps up to 262 electoral votes, Kamala Harris at 240. Now it all is going to come down to Virginia, Pennsylvania, and New Hampshire. So let's start off in the state of Virginia. What we're finding here, Kamala Harris maintains an advantage of 6.7%. A reduction again from the 2020 election, but still winning the state by a likely Democratic margin. This actually has been a pretty substantive shift. It's one of the larger ones we have seen across any of the battleground states, but still it's not a state that either party is really investing in. Democrats absolutely could see some bleeding because of the lack of investments in the state. And overall, it's still a likely victory for the Democratic Party and a slight reduction from 2020. A lot of it is in line with what we've been seeing in some of these other battleground states. So those 13 electoral votes go to Kamala Harris, bring us down to the remaining 23 toss-up electoral votes. Now, for the sake of suspense, I want to move over to Pennsylvania last. New Hampshire is a state that Biden won by 7. Harris is up by 7. Slight underperformance, but still on par with that of the 2020 election. So those 4 electoral votes go to Kamala Harris. No real shock there. It all comes down truly to Pennsylvania. 262 for Donald Trump, 257 for Kamala Harris, 19 electoral votes. Let's take a look at what Pennsylvania says. And it says that Kamala Harris maintains a lead of 0.6%. So in the state that matters the most, and the state that is the closest of them all, is the battleground state of Pennsylvania. This is a state that we have been honing in on since the very beginning as the battleground state. That's why Donald Trump and Kamala Harris's campaigns have both invested over $100 million each in this battleground state alone with the purpose of winning. A lot of those voters are getting, a lot of money being thrown at them. Some of these swing district voters are getting tens of thousands of dollars being swung to just one person in particular. I mean, you're talking about, not one person in particular, but you were talking about immense amounts of money being used and spent in this state. A very, very populous one. 19 electoral votes hands Kamala Harris the presidency, but only narrowly, and really goes to show just how close and competitive this election truly is. And so we actually said earlier on today, the pathway of least resistance for Kamala Harris to the presidency was through these battleground states: Nevada, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania. And I promise you, I did not look at the polls before I made that video, at least not in the way that was averaging out all of the states. I really have come to realize now it feels a little bit weird seeing the same electoral map back to where it was before, with slight differences, right, in Michigan and Pennsylvania. But beyond that, too, I mean, this is how this race largely has been for the past few months, even when it was Biden, right? Prior to that debate, this was also Biden's pathway to the presidency. And I think this is really because a lot of the support we've seen Kamala Harris lose does, in fact, start with that bleeding that existed in 2020 that wasn't patched through the 2024 election. And maybe if Kamala Harris had been that nominee from the very beginning, it would have been in a better position. But you're talking about a presidential campaign that launched on July 21st that is now within striking distance, if not the likeliest outcome, being the victory for Kamala Harris. And what I find to be even more interesting is that in these battleground states, the numbers truly haven't swayed as much as you might think prior to that first presidential debate between Biden and Trump. A lot of these numbers actually looked very similar. Donald Trump might have had that advantage, and Kamala Harris now has it. But a swing of no more than 3 points across some of these battleground states, which goes to show no matter what we were in, putting aside that debate that eventually led to the dropping out of Joe Biden from the presidential race, because it's a very, very big history-making moment, history-making debate for the Biden campaign. But still, the fact remains, this race was always made to be close and competitive, and that's what the polls suggest. They also show that no side really can be complacent at this point. There is nobody that actually knows how this election is going to go to perfection, and that's because it is so incredibly competitive. Both sides, Republicans and Democrats alike, have reason to believe their candidate is going to win. The Republican argument is Donald Trump has been always underestimated on the ballot every single time he's been on it, and that's why he outperformed these very narrow leads that Kamala Harris has, because they aren't large enough for for Kamala Harris to prevent Donald Trump from overcoming them through any type of standard polling error that we have seen in the day and age of Donald Trump being on that ballot. Democrats can argue that in the day and age after Roe v. Wade, 2022 midterms, and every special election and off-year election since then has proven this to be true, the polls now underestimate Democrats and miss the mark on newly engaged and energized voters that are now voting for the first time because of issues like abortion, because of issues very personal to the rights of women and reproductive freedoms across the country. These are things that are now going to be at contention and going to be things that people discuss after this election. What actually drove Kamala Harris to victory? What actually drove Donald Trump to victory? These are things that will be discussed, studied, analyzed, overall. That's going to be what we are going to be focusing on after this election cycle, and the polls give us an early glimpse of just how long this campaign is actually going to be, how competitive it just is going to be. I mean, we are really in for a wild ride, I will say, and I think that it's going to be a very exciting time. I'm very thrilled that, we are in a point in time where elections are, requiring a lot more deeper thought and conversation than just, the polls say that one candidate has a landslide. I think that's where we were on track to, not landslide, but a strong victory. I think that's what we saw in 2020. That's what we were on track to see in 2024 before Kamala Harris became the nominee. And so all around here, I would say we're in a good place when it comes down to those who are interested in competitive elections, but neither party really is in a good, what I would say to be an amazing place or a place where they can get complacent or not worry about some of these states. Every single vote is going to be I can't even speak. I don't know why I'm missing on this. Every single vote is something that Democrats and Republicans are going to need to fight for. They're going to need to focus and hone in on these battleground states because it is exceptionally close. I am interested to see that Georgia flips to the Republican Party, and so does Arizona. North Carolina, though, reduces in terms of margin, right? So you're talking about improvements in Arizona, improvements in Georgia, and reduction in support in North Carolina. You're also seeing a reduction in support in Pennsylvania, but an expansion of support for Kamala Harris in Wisconsin. It's really a fascinating group. Tim Walz and Kamala Harris are doing worse in Minnesota than Biden did in 2020, despite the sitting governor being on the ticket there. In New Hampshire, it's a slight underperformance, but only by 0.4%, nothing major or substantive, versus Virginia, where you're seeing a near 4-point shift from the 2020 election. The polls show a mixed bag for both sides of the aisle. None of it shows massive gains for either direction. And that's why it's so competitive. This election truly is going to be one of the closest of American history, and it might even be the closest of the 21st century, despite 2000, which was 271 to 266. Take away Nevada for Kamala Harris, this ends up being one of the closest races we have ever seen in American history. And what do the polls tell us? We're just a margin of error away from that being our reality. We'll track these polls over the coming weeks. We'll track to see how they have changed and fluctuated from week to week to week to week, because it really does matter. In the final stretch of the campaign, 31 days out, a month away from the presidential election, 30 days actually, not even 31, 30 days away. We're in a very, very close race, a very competitive one, and one that will be fascinating to watch for likely years to come. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the top left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2024 election prediction videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow.